The first time he forgot her name, she laughed because laughter was easier than fear and because it seemed harmless then, like a small misstep anyone could make. The kind of thing that could be blamed on distraction or fatigue or the ordinary chaos of life. And the second time he forgot, she told herself he was just tired. That age had a way of dulling edges without stealing meaning. That everyone forgot things sometimes and that it meant nothing at all. But the third time, when he looked at her with polite curiosity instead of recognition, when his eyes searched her face as though it belonged to someone he had never known, she felt something inside her loosen and fall away. Because in that moment, Lily understood that she was slowly disappearing from the men who had once known her better than anyone else. And the room around her felt suddenly unfamiliar, as though memory itself had shifted the walls. And the soft beeping of a hospital monitor somewhere nearby seemed to mark not time but loss. And it was impossible not to remember how things had been 25 years earlier, when Robert Hayes had been strong and certain and present in ways that felt permanent. When Lily was 7 years old and believed her father could fix anything simply by showing up. And he did show up, always, knowing her favorite ice cream without being told, knowing the name of her imaginary friend and taking it seriously, knowing the exact way she liked her pancakes and remaking them without complaint if the edges were too crisp, attending every school play no matter how small her role, fixing her bike with patient hands, walking her to class on the first day of school and pretending not to notice how tightly she held his fingers. And there was never a moment in those years when Lily questioned whether her father knew her, because he knew everything that mattered, and forgetting was something that happened to other people, in other families, in stories that belonged to someone else. And even as time moved forward and Lily grew into adulthood, even as she turned 32 and Robert turned 72, she still thought of him as the one constant in her life. The one person who never forgot birthdays or promises or the way she took her coffee. And the small memory slips that began to appear felt insignificant at first. Keys misplaced, stories repeated, appointments forgotten, moments brushed aside with gentle teasing and quiet reassurance. And Lily noticed but said nothing because saying something felt like naming a fear she was not ready to face. And she told herself that noticing was enough. That loving meant protecting him from worry as much as it meant caring for him. And then came the family dinner when he looked at her and smiled and called her by her mother's name. And everyone laughed gently, including Robert himself, because laughter made it easier for him too. But Lily saw the confusion flicker behind his eyes like a light struggling to stay on. And the doctor visit that followed confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. Early-stage Alzheimer's. A phrase that settled into the room with weight and permanence. And Robert joked about finally having an excuse to forget birthdays while Lily smiled and held herself together until she reached her car and cried where no one could see. Because she had always been his little girl and now she was becoming his memory. And months passed and the changes became harder to ignore. Robert forgetting how to use a television remote. Forgetting neighbors he had known for years. Forgetting the way home once and laughing it off even as Lily's hands shook on the steering wheel. And when she moved him into her house, it felt both natural and unnatural at the same time. Like stepping into a role she had rehearsed for without ever realizing it. Labeling cabinets, writing reminders, placing sticky notes everywhere as if words could hold memory in place. And one evening when Robert looked at a photograph of Lily sitting on his shoulders as a child and whispered that she looked happy, Lily told him softly that he had made her that way. And when he did not respond because he did not remember, the silence felt heavier than any argument ever could. And then came the day that would define everything. The night Robert wandered outside and was found dehydrated but alive. The hospital room quiet and clinical and unforgiving in its clarity. And Lily walked in and said hello the way she always had, and he looked at her politely and asked if she was the nurse. And her heart cracked in a way that made breathing feel like work. And she forced a smile and told him it was her. And he studied her face with effort and nothing came. And when he asked her name, the silence stretched so long it felt like the longest of her life. And when she said Lillian, he nodded and told her it was a pretty name. She understood something that changed the shape of her grief, that love does not disappear. Memory does. And that the absence of recognition did not mean the absence of feeling. And from that day forward, she stopped correcting him and stopped forcing him to remember and stopped measuring their relationship by what he could recall, choosing instead to sit beside him and read old stories and play his favorite music and hold his hand and let presence replace proof. And one afternoon when he suddenly whispered pumpkins, the nickname he had given her when she was small, Lily froze because that word belonged only to them. And when he followed it with strawberry ice cream, she laughed through tears because moments like that were rare and fleeting and precious, lasting only seconds but holding enough meaning to sustain her through weeks of absence. And later, as Robert sat by the window peaceful and distant and Lily brushed his hair gently, she understood that he might forget her name again tomorrow and forget the stories and forget the years they shared. But somewhere in the quiet place where love lives beyond language and memory and recognition, he still knew she was his daughter. And loving him now meant loving louder, loving without expectation, loving without needing to be remembered. Because love, she realized, was not something that lived in the mind alone, but something that remained even when the mind could no longer hold it. And that understanding did not erase the pain but gave it purpose. And Lily stayed, day after day, learning how to grieve someone who was still alive, learning how to cherish moments without trying to preserve them, learning how to let go of the father she once knew while holding on to the men who still needed her. And in that quiet persistence she found a different kind of strength. One that did not demand recognition but offered itself anyway, believing that even if memory faded completely, love would remain, waiting patiently in the spaces words could no longer reach. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks softened into months, Lily learned that grief did not arrive all at once but moved in slowly, rearranging her understanding of love piece by piece. Because loving her father now meant standing in a space where recognition was no longer guaranteed, where every interaction carried the quiet risk of absence, and yet she showed up anyway, morning after morning, evening after evening, measuring time not by what was lost but by what remained, noticing how Robert still reacted to music even when names slipped away, how his fingers tightened slightly around hers when a familiar melody played, how his expression softened when sunlight touched the window just right. And she began to understand that memory was only one language of love, not the only one, and that when words failed, touch and tone and presence spoke more clearly than ever. And she stopped mourning the moments that never returned and started honoring the ones that appeared unexpectedly, however brief, however fragile. And she kept a quiet record of these moments in her heart because writing them down felt like admitting they might disappear. And she was not ready to see them that way. And sometimes Robert would look at her with a familiarity he could not explain, a sense of comfort that did not need a name. And Lily would feel both gratitude and sorrow at once, because being known without being remembered was its own kind of intimacy, one that asked her to release her need to be recognized and replace it with the willingness to simply be there. And she realized that her father was teaching her something even now, something he would never be able to articulate. That love is not a transaction built on recall but a commitment built on care. And as his world grew smaller, Lily's grew quieter, her priorities shifting away from urgency and toward meaning. Learning to slow her own pace to match his, learning to sit without filling the silence, learning that some days the greatest act of devotion was patience. And there were nights when exhaustion pressed heavily on her chest, when she grieved the conversations they would never have and the future moments he would never fully understand. But even then she stayed, because leaving would have meant protecting herself at the cost of abandoning him. And she had learned that love sometimes asks for endurance rather than fairness. And as Robert's memory continued to fade, Lily noticed how the essence of him remained, how his kindness surfaced even without context, how his humor appeared in unexpected fragments, how his trust in her never wavered even when her identity blurred. And she understood then that while Alzheimer stole chronology and detail, it could not erase character, and that realization steadied her during the hardest moments. The nights when he woke frightened and confused, calling out for someone he could no longer name. And Lily would sit beside him, speaking gently, grounding him not in facts but in feeling, reminding him through tone and touch that he was safe, that he was not alone, and that someone loved him deeply even if he could not remember why. And in doing so she found herself transformed, her understanding of strength reshaped, her definition of family rewritten not as mutual recognition but as unwavering presence. And when people told her she was brave, she did not feel brave. She felt devoted, because devotion did not require courage. It required consistency, and consistency had always been something her father taught her long before memory failed. And in the quiet hours when Robert sat by the window and Lily brushed his hair, she felt the weight of both past and present settle into something gentle, something honest, because she knew that even if tomorrow he forgot her name again, even if one day he forgot faces entirely, the love that bound them existed beyond language and time, living in the way he relaxed when she entered the room, in the way his hand searched for hers without knowing why. And she accepted that loving him now meant letting go of the need to be remembered and embracing the privilege of remembering for both of them, carrying their shared history forward when he could not. And that understanding did not erase the sadness but gave it meaning, and meaning, she discovered, made the weight bearable. And so she stayed, loving louder, loving longer, loving without condition, believing that even when memory fails completely, love remains quiet but intact, waiting not to be recalled, but to be felt.